Beloved, tonight is not just a transition of time, it is a sacred moment of alignment. We are not merely counting down seconds into a new year. We are standing at the threshold of divine ordination. Crossover moments are spiritual intersections where eternity touches time, where patterns are broken, and where destinies receive fresh authorization. The difference between those who enter a new year and those who enter it empowered is not wishes, but prayers that carry understanding. As we stand between what has been and what is to come, we recognize that years do not change men, light does. Without spiritual illumination, a new calendar only repeats old cycles. Therefore, this moment calls for intentional prayers, prayers that acknowledge God's sovereignty over times and seasons, prayers that secure mercy for our errors, and prayers that activate grace for our assignment in 2026. Tonight, we come with humility and faith, knowing that nothing in the kingdom is automatic. We refuse to cross over casually. We contend for alignment. We contend for preservation, and we contend for clarity. As we pray, may heaven grant us the wisdom to discern what to carry forward and the courage to release what must not follow us. And as we step into 2026, may we do so not just alive, but empowered, positioned, and divinely authorized for all that God has prepared. Entering 2026 with thanksgiving and surrender is a spiritual posture, not a seasonal activity. It is the understanding that life is sustained not by strength or strategy alone, but by the mercy of God. When you look back over the months and years behind you, you quickly realize that many things that tried to stop you did not succeed, not because you were wiser or stronger, but because the hand of God upheld you. Thanksgiving, therefore, is not politeness, it is accuracy. It is the honest acknowledgement that God has been faithful even when you were unaware, even when you were inconsistent, even when you did not pray as you should. Thanksgiving refines your perception. It trains your heart to recognize God's involvement in both the obvious victories and the quiet preservations. Some of the greatest testimonies of your life are not events you celebrated, but disasters that never happened, doors that did not open, relationships that ended before they destroyed you, delays that saved you from premature exposure. When you enter 2026 with thanksgiving, you are saying, Lord, I see you not only in what I gained, but in what you denied me. That kind of gratitude carries spiritual weight. It attracts divine attention because it aligns your heart with truth. But thanksgiving alone is incomplete without surrender. Thanksgiving looks back and acknowledges God's faithfulness. Surrender looks forward and yields control. Many people thank God for yesterday, yet attempt to control tomorrow. This posture creates anxiety because the future was never designed to be managed by human strength. Surrender is the intentional release of self-dependence. It is the confession that you do not know enough, you are not strong enough, and you are not eternal enough to script your destiny by yourself. To enter 2026 with surrender is to place your plans, ambitions, timelines, and expectations on the altar. It is to say, Lord, interrupt me if I am wrong, redirect me if I am early, stop me if I am proud, and delay me if the structure cannot yet sustain the glory you intend to release. Surrender is not weakness, it is intelligence in the spirit. It is understanding that God sees the end from the beginning, and that alignment is more valuable than speed. Thanksgiving keeps your heart soft, surrender keeps your spirit flexible. Together, they prepare you for divine dealings. A thankful heart is difficult to offend, and a surrendered life is easy for God to guide. Many frustrations in life are not attacks from the enemy, but resistance between God's will and human insistence. When surrender is absent, even prayer becomes a tool to persuade God to bless your own agenda. But when surrender is present, prayer becomes a dialogue of alignment, where your desires are refined, not just answered. As you cross into 2026, Thanksgiving will protect you from entitlement. It will remind you that every level you stand on was accessed by grace. It will deliver you from comparison, because gratitude focuses on what God has done in your own journey. not what he is doing in someone else's. A grateful person is secure because they understand that God is not in competition with himself. What he has done for another does not threaten what he is doing for you. Surrender, on the other hand, will protect you from frustration. It will save you from forcing doors that God has not opened and from ignoring instructions that seem inconvenient. Many people enter a new year with resolutions, but without revelation. They are determined, but not directed. Surrender invites divine leadership into your daily decisions. It allows God to choose the battles you fight, the relationships you pursue, and the seasons you rest. When thanksgiving and surrender govern your entrance into 2026, your life becomes an offering, not a negotiation. You stop asking God to follow you and start asking him where he is going. This is the point where destiny begins to unfold with less strain. You still work, you still plan, you still grow, but you do so with an inward rest, knowing that your steps are ordered. There is a kind of peace that only comes when the future is no longer a burden. That peace is the fruit of surrender. It does not mean uncertainty disappears, but it means fear loses its authority. You may not know how everything will work out, but you know who holds the script. Thanksgiving reminds you of his past faithfulness. Surrender assures you of his future guidance. To enter 2026 this way is to make a powerful spiritual statement. It tells the heavens that you trust God more than outcomes. It tells your spirit that your identity is not tied to achievements alone. It tells your mind that rest is permitted even while pursuing greatness. And it tells God that you are available, teachable, and yielded. Such a life becomes fertile ground for divine encounters. God is drawn to yielded vessels because they can carry weight without breaking. He entrusts direction to those who have learned to release control. He multiplies impact through those who remember where he brought them from. When thanksgiving and shape your entry into a new year. You do not just step into time, you step into alignment, into clarity, into a posture where grace can speak loudly and direction can come easily, where even delays make sense and waiting seasons are not wasted, where obedience becomes joyful and trust becomes natural, where your life is no longer driven by fear of missing out, but by confidence in divine timing, where every day becomes an act of worship and every decision becomes an opportunity to say, yes, Lord, I am here. Lead me, shape me, use me. I release myself into your hands as I step forward into all that this new season carries, with a heart full of gratitude for where I have been and a spirit fully yielded to where you are taking me, trusting that your wisdom is superior, your love is constant, and your plans are always good, even when I do not yet understand. And so I cross over, not with noise, but with depth, not with pressure, but with peace, not with pride, but with reverence, knowing that the safest place for my life, my future, and my destiny is completely surrendered to God's will and purposes for me in 2026 and beyond, walking forward with a grateful heart and open hands, ready for whatever he chooses to place within them, ready for whatever he chooses to remove, confident that nothing released was ever meant to define me, and nothing ahead will be able to overwhelm me as long as I remain thankful, surrendered, and yielded to the one who holds all times and seasons, who never fails, who never abandons, who never misleads, and whose presence is more valuable than any promise. As I step into this new year with faith that rests, obedience that flows, and a heart that says, let it be unto me according to your will, now and always. As I move forward into 2026 with trust that does not shake and gratitude that does not fade, anchored in the assurance that God is faithful and his ways are perfect, and my life is safest when it is fully laid down before him, not holding back, not resisting, not bargaining, but yielded completely, spirit, soul, and body, for whatever glory he intends to reveal in and through me in this season and the seasons yet to come, knowing that this posture will continually attract light, direction, and grace into every dimension of my life as I walk with him into the unfolding days ahead, carried by mercy, led by wisdom, and sustained by love, trusting him fully, without reservation, without fear, without retreat, with my whole heart aligned to his purpose, stepping forward in quiet confidence, deeply aware that the journey ahead is secure, because the one who leads me never fails and never lets go. And so I enter this year not clinging to control, but resting in surrender, not anxious about outcomes, but anchored in thanksgiving, allowing God to write the story as he wills, for his glory and my transformation, day by day, step by step, breath by breath, fully yielded to him always, even now, even here, even as I move forward into what lies ahead, surrendered, thankful, trusting, and at rest, knowing that his presence goes with me, and that is enough, more than enough, sufficient for every season, every challenge, every opportunity, every unfolding chapter, as my life remains an altar and my future remains in his hands, completely, unreservedly, eternally surrendered, trusting him without question, without fear, without holding back, now stepping into all that awaits, with thanksgiving in my heart and surrender as my offering, ready for the unfolding of his will, confident that he who began this work will carry it through faithfully, perfectly, lovingly, as I continue forward into 2026 with my whole being yielded to him, forever resting in his wisdom, his timing, his love, and his sovereign plan for my life as I walk on with gratitude and surrender, shaping every step, every decision, every moment, every breath, now and always, without end, trusting him completely, fully, eternally, yielded, available, and aligned, walking forward into this new season with my life laid down before him, trusting that he knows the way, and I follow, surrendered, grateful, secure, at peace, and ready for whatever comes next, knowing that in his hands my life is safe, my future is secure, and my journey is guided by his unfailing wisdom and love, as I step forward into the days ahead with a heart that remains thankful and a spirit that remains surrendered, fully, wholly, and forever unto him, without reserve, without fear, without turning back, carried by grace, led by truth, and resting completely in his perfect will for my life as time unfolds and destiny aligns, now crossing over with gratitude and surrender, shaping every part of who I am and all that I become, trusting him completely as I go forward into the unfolding year, yielded and thankful, trusting him still, trusting him always, trusting him completely, even as the journey continues deeper and deeper into his purpose, his plan, his will, his glory, without resistance, without hesitation, fully surrendered, fully grateful, fully at rest, moving forward into the future he has prepared, with my heart open, my hands lifted, my will released, and my life placed entirely in his hands, trusting that this posture will continually attract his presence, his guidance, his favor, and his peace as I continue walking forward into all that lies ahead, surrendered, thankful, and secure, without end, without fear, without looking back, moving forward, yielded, aligned, and resting in him always and forever, as I remain positioned in gratitude and surrender, allowing God to take full control, lead fully, and work freely in and through my life now and beyond, trusting him completely without holding back as I continue onwards, surrendered and thankful, even now, even still, even as I go on, yielded, trusting, resting, aligned, secure, and confident in him as the journey unfolds endlessly, guided by his hand, sustained by his grace, and anchored in the posture of thanksgiving and surrender that defines my life as I move forward into all that awaits, with faith, peace, and total reliance on God, fully surrendered, forever grateful, and completely at rest in him, without pause, without conclusion, without an ending, only continuation, deeper trust, fuller surrender, greater gratitude, and ongoing alignment with his will. As I walk on, yielded, thankful, and secure, trusting him completely as the days continue to unfold, endlessly, faithfully, under his sovereign care, surrendered still, grateful still, trusting still, moving forward, always into all that he has prepared, with my heart fully aligned, my spirit fully yielded, and my life fully committed to him, now and forever, continuing onward without stopping, without closing, without concluding, but remaining in this posture, surrendered, thankful, and walking forward even now, even here, as the journey goes on deeper, fuller, richer, guided by Him, resting in Him, trusting Him, surrendered and grateful, still moving forward, still yielded, still aligned, still trusting, still thankful as I continue without end into all that lies ahead, surrendered to God's will, thankful for His faithfulness and resting in His perfect plan now and always, and still going forward, yielded, grateful, trusting, resting, walking, believing, surrendered, thankful, secure, moving on deeper into Him as time continues and destiny unfolds with no conclusion, no ending, only surrender, gratitude, and forward movement into His eternal purpose, trusting Him endlessly, fully, complete. Eli, surrendered, thankful, walking on even now, still going, still yielding, still trusting, still grateful, still aligned, still moving forward, without end, without closure, without conclusion, just continued surrender and thanksgiving as I move forward into all that God has prepared for me now, and still, and still, and still, trusting Him, yielding to Him, grateful to Him, walking forward, resting in Him as the journey continues endlessly, surrendered, thankful, aligned, trusting, secure, moving forward, forever in His hands, still going, still yielding, still thankful, still trusting, still walking, still surrendered, still grateful, still moving forward into the unfolding of His will, without end, without finish, without conclusion, just continued alignment, surrender, and thanksgiving. As I keep walking with Him into the days ahead, yielded and grateful, always, still, now, and onward, trusting Him as the journey continues, without stopping, without closing, without ending, only moving forward, surrendered and thankful, deeper into His purpose, still going, still trusting, still yielded, still grateful, as I walk on into all that He has prepared, forever surrendered, forever thankful, forever trusting, still moving, still walking, still aligned, still resting, still yielding, still grateful, still trusting, still going forward, endlessly into His will, His plan, His purpose, His glory, surrendered. Letting go of the old to embrace God's new in your life is a spiritual requirement, not an emotional suggestion. In the kingdom of God, progression is often tied to separation. Many people desire new seasons, new dimensions, and new manifestations, yet they cling tightly to old mindsets, old identities, old wounds, old habits, and even old victories. God's dealings with men reveal that increase is rarely about addition alone. More often it begins with subtracti. There are things that were permitted for a season that become limitations in another, and discernment is required to know when God is saying release. Even when the thing you are holding once served a purpose, letting go begins in the mind. As long as your thinking is framed by yesterday's failures or even yesterday's successes, you will struggle to recognize what God is doing now. Some people are bound by regret, replaying moments they wish they could change, allowing guilt to define their self-worth and expectations. Others are bound by nostalgia, constantly referencing what God did before, not realizing that yesterday's testimony can become today's ceiling if it replaces hunger. God is a God of continuity, but He is also a God of progressive revelation. He builds upon foundations, but He does not recycle seasons. What worked before may not work again in the same way, and clinging to familiarity can quietly resist divine advancement. To let go of the old is not to dishonor the past, it is to rightly place it. The past is meant to instruct you, not imprison you. It should give you wisdom, not wounds. When God calls you into a new phase, He often challenges attachments that feel safe. Sometimes it is a relationship that no longer aligns with your becoming. Sometimes it is a pattern of thinking that kept you comfortable but limited. Sometimes it is a version of yourself that was acceptable in survival mode, but is insufficient for stewardship. God never takes without intending to replace. but what he replaces with is often higher, heavier, and demands more responsibility. Embracing God's new requires trust, because the new is rarely fully explained. Faith is demanded not only to receive miracles, but to follow instructions. Many people want the results of obedience without the discomfort of transition. Yet every transition includes a period of vulnerability where the old no longer works and the new is not yet fully formed. This is where many retreat. They return to familiar cycles because uncertainty feels threatening. But spiritual maturity is revealed in your ability to obey God even when the next step is not fully illuminated. There are times God asks you to let go of what is good to make room for what is God ordained. Good things can become distractions when they occupy space meant for divine purpose. Comfort can become resistance. Routine can become rebellion. When God introduces something new, He often begins by disturbing your peace with the old. This disturbance is not punishment, it is invitation. It is heaven signaling that you have outgrown a season. If you ignore it, stagnation follows. If you discern it and respond, transformation begins. Letting go also involves releasing internal narratives that no longer align with truth. Some people still see themselves through the lens of who they were when they were broken, immature, or ignorant. God does not call you by your history, He calls you by your destiny. When He gives you a new name, a new assignment, or a new responsibility, He expects you to upgrade your self-perception. Holding on to labels that God has already redeemed is a form of unbelief. You cannot embrace God's new while rehearsing who you used to be. There is also the discipline of releasing offenses. Unforgiveness anchors you to yesterday. It keeps your emotions, thoughts, and reactions tied to moments that God has already moved past. God's new often requires emotional freedom, because bitterness distorts discernment. You may pray for direction, but unresolved pain can cause you to misinterpret God's voice. Letting go of the old includes allowing God to heal what hurt you, even when the apology never came, even when justice seems delayed. Freedom is more valuable than being proven right. Embracing God. New also demands courage, because the new often exposes you. New levels bring visibility, responsibility, and accountability. What was hidden in one season becomes obvious in another. This is why God deals deeply with character before promotion. If you carry old insecurities into a new platform, the weight of exposure can crush you. If you carry old pride into a new level of influence, the fall can be devastating. Letting go prepares you internally for what God wants to entrust to you externally. God's new is not always dramatic. Sometimes it is subtle shifts in priority, discipline, and alignment. It may look like a renewed hunger for His presence, a new burden for prayer, a new sensitivity to His voice, or a new intolerance for compromise. These are signs that God is upgrading your spiritual capacity. But these upgrades require space. You cannot keep everything and still move forward. Spiritual baggage slows destiny. There is grace for transition, but grace does not eliminate responsibility. You must cooperate with God's dealings. When He highlights something to release, delay becomes disobedience. Partial obedience prolongs process. Letting go may feel like loss initially, but it produces clarity. What you release in obedience, God restores in purpose. What you surrender willingly, God replaces intentionally. When you truly let go of the old, you begin to discern God's new more clearly. Your prayers become aligned, not confused. Your decisions become intentional, not reactive. Your movement becomes purposeful, not frantic. You stop striving to recreate past seasons and start stewarding present instructions. This is where peace replaces pressure and direction replaces noise. God's new always carries greater alignment with His will. It may stretch you, but it will not corrupt you. It may demand more, but it will also supply grace. The key is willingness. As your hands are full of yesterday, you will struggle to receive today. But when you release what God has already concluded, you position yourself to receive what He has prepared. This posture requires humility, because it acknowledges that God knows better than you do. It is a confession that your understanding is limited. but his wisdom is perfect. Letting go is saying, Lord, I trust you enough to release what I cannot fully explain, because I believe what you are leading me into is superior to what I am leaving behind. As you practice this in your life, you will notice that transitions become less frightening. You become more discerning, less sentimental, more obedient, less attached to seasons, and more committed to purpose. You begin to move with God, not ahead of him or behind him. This is the posture that attracts clarity, acceleration, and sustained impact. To let go of the old and embrace God's new is to live in perpetual alignment with heaven's agenda. It is choosing growth over comfort, purpose over familiarity, obedience over explanation. It is allowing God to redefine you continually, without resistance, without nostalgia, without fear, trusting that every instruction to release is an invitation to rise, that every ending is preparing you for a beginning that carries more light, more responsibility, and more grace, as you walk forward with a heart that is yielded, a mind that is renewed, and a spirit that is attentive, moving in step with God as he unfolds his will in layers, season by season, dimension by dimension, drawing you deeper into purpose, deeper into alignment, deeper into maturity. As you continue the journey of faith, releasing what was, embracing what is, and trusting him fully for what is yet to come, knowing that nothing you release in obedience will ever compare to what God reveals in alignment. As you keep moving forward, letting go, embracing, trusting, obeying, growing, yielding, walking, discerning, becoming, moving steadily into all that God has ordained for your life, without resistance, without retreat, without looking back, continuing onward into his unfolding purpose, step by step, day by day, guided by his wisdom, strengthened by his grace, and anchored in the assurance that his new is always better than your old, as you remain yielded, available, and responsive to his leading. Still moving forward, still releasing, still embracing, still trusting, still aligning, still becoming, as the journey continues, deeper and further into his will, without conclusion, without ending, only continued obedience, transformation, and forward movement into all that God has prepared, as you let go and embrace again and again, walking on with him into the unfolding seasons ahead. Crossing over by faith and not by fear is a defining spiritual decision that shapes how you enter new seasons of your life. Every crossover season comes with uncertainty, and uncertainty naturally invites fear. Fear thrives where information is incomplete and outcomes are not guaranteed. Faith, however, is the confidence that God remains present and intentional, even when the path ahead is not fully revealed. To cross over by faith is to move forward based on divine conviction rather than emotional comfort, trusting that the one who calls you also sustains you. Fear is often subtle. It does not always appear as panic or anxiety. Sometimes it shows up as overthinking, delay, perfectionism, or the desire to control outcomes. Many people appear calm on the outside while internally negotiating with fear, asking what-if questions that paralyze obedience. Fear magnifies risk and minimizes God's faithfulness. It rehearses past disappointments and projects them into the future, convincing you that progress is dangerous and staying the same is safer. But remaining in familiar territory can quietly become disobedience when God is calling you forward. Faith does not deny the existence of challenges. Faith acknowledges reality, but refuses to let reality have the final voice. To cross over by faith is not to pretend that the waters are not deep or that the giants are not real. It is to believe that God is greater than both. Faith is rooted in revelation, not optimism. It is built on knowing who God is, what he has said, and how he has proven himself across time. When faith leads, courage follows naturally, not because the situation is easy, but because God is trusted. Fear asks what will happen if you fail. Faith asks what will happen if God is involved. Fear focuses on what you might lose. Faith focuses on what God has already secured. Fear ties your movement to human approval and personal adequacy. Faith anchors your movement in divine backing. This is why two people can face the same transition and respond differently. The difference is not the season, it is the lens through which the season is interpreted. Crossing over by faith requires hearing God clearly. Many fears are sustained because people move based on assumptions rather than instructions. When God speaks, He may not explain everything, but He gives enough clarity to demand obedience. Faith begins where explanation ends. God often calls people to move before they feel ready, because readiness in the spirit is not the same as confidence in the flesh. If God waited for complete emotional certainty, many destinies would never unfold. There is also the fear of loss that accompanies crossover moments. You fear losing stability, relationships, identity, or control. Faith reframes loss as exchange. When God leads you out of one season, He is not subtracting from your life. He is repositioning you for multiplication. But fear resists this truth, because it measures value based on what is visible and immediate. Faith, on the other hand, understands that obedience sometimes requires temporary discomfort to secure long-term alignment. Another dimension of fear is the fear of responsibility. New seasons come with new demands. Faith accepts responsibility because it trusts grace. Fear avoids responsibility because it trusts self-effort. When you believe that the next level depends entirely on your strength, fear will dominate you. But when you understand that every level God leads you into is sustained by grace, you can move forward with humility and confidence. Faith is not arrogance, it is dependence. Crossing over by faith also means refusing to let past failures define future obedience. Many people hesitate to move forward because previous attempts ended in disappointment. Fear interprets failure as a permanent verdict. Faith interprets failure as a lesson, not a sentence. God is not limited by your past mistakes. He redeems experiences and uses them to build wisdom. When fear keeps reminding you of what went wrong, faith reminds you of who God is now. Faith must be practiced deliberately. It is strengthened by exposure to truth, intimacy with God, and consistent obedience in small things. You do not suddenly become fearless in major transitions if you have ignored faith in daily decisions. Faith grows as you learn to trust God incrementally. Each step of obedience builds spiritual confidence. Each testimony becomes a weapon against future fear. There is also the fear of timing, the anxiety that you might be too late or too early. Faith trusts divine timing. It believes that God orchestrates seasons with precision. Fear rushes ahead or lags behind. Faith moves when God says move and waits when God says wait. This discernment produces peace even in uncertain moments. When you cross over by faith, you are no. Racing against others, you are walking with God. Fear isolates, but faith aligns. Fear makes you internalize everything, but faith invites counsel, prayer, and community. God often uses godly voices to confirm direction and strengthen resolve. Isolation amplifies fear, but alignment with truth reinforces faith. When God is leading you into a new season, He rarely leaves you without witnesses to His intention. Crossing over by faith is also a declaration to the spiritual realm. It announces that you trust God more than circumstances. It signals that intimidation will not determine your obedience. This posture attracts divine assistance. God responds to faith because faith honors His character. When you move in faith, heaven backs your steps, even when the ground feels unfamiliar. Fear promises safety but produces stagnation. Faith demands courage but releases life. The comfort of fear is deceptive. It feels protective, but it slowly erodes potential. Faith may stretch you, but it aligns you with purpose. Many regrets in life are not from risks taken in obedience, but from steps never taken because of fear. As you cross into new seasons, faith must be chosen daily. Fear does not disappear automatically. It is silenced intentionally. You silence fear by returning to what God has said, by remembering His faithfulness, and by acting in obedience even when emotions resist. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is the decision to obey God despite it. When you cross over by faith, your life begins to reflect divine intentionality. You may still face challenges, but you face them with assurance. You may still feel pressure, but you are not crushed by it. You begin to discern that every transition God leads you through is preparing you for greater stewardship, deeper intimacy, and clearer purpose. Faith produces rest even while moving forward. It allows you to trust all you comes to God. It frees you from excessive anxiety about results. When you know that God is leading you, you can focus on obedience and leave the results to Him. This is the freedom that fear can never provide. Crossing over by faith is not a one-time event, it is a lifestyle. Every new level will require the same decision again and again. Will you respond to God's leading with trust or retreat into fear? The more you choose faith, the more familiar it comes. Eventually, fear loses its authority, and obedience becomes your default response. Is how lives are transformed, not by the absence of challenges, but by the consistent choice to trust God beyond what is seen. This is how destinies unfold, not through perfect conditions, but through yielded hearts that move when God speaks. When you cross over by faith and not by fear, you position yourself to experience God not just as a concept, but as a living guide, leading you step by step into greater clarity, deeper purpose, and sustained impact. As you continue moving forward with confidence rooted in God's presence, trusting Him beyond your understanding, walking boldly into the unknown, anchored in the assurance that He who leads you will not abandon you, that every step taken in faith is secured by grace, and that your future is safest when you follow God without hesitation, without retreat, without fear, choosing faith again and again as you move forward into all that He has prepared for you, walking on, trusting Him, yielding fully, and continuing the journey with courage, obedience, and unwavering confidence in His unfailing guidance and love. Moving forward still, believing still, trusting still, stepping onward by faith, not fear, crossing over by faith and not by fear, is a conscious alignment of the heart with divine truth in moments of transition. Every major shift in life confronts you with two voices. One speaks from uncertainty, magnifying risks, and reminding you of what could go wrong. The other speaks from conviction, drawing strength from who God is and what He has promised. The difference between stagnation and advancement is often determined by which voice you choose to obey. Fear will always present itself as wisdom, urging caution, delay, and self-preservation, but faith speaks with quiet authority, calling you to trust God beyond what your senses can verify. Fear is sustained by the illusion of control. It convinces you that if you can predict every outcome, manage every variable, and prepare for every possibility, then you will be safe. But life does not submit to human control, and destiny cannot be accessed through calculation alone. Faith acknowledges uncertainty but refuses to be ruled by it. It recognizes that God does not require complete understanding before obedience. He requires trust. To cross over by faith is to move when God says move, even when the details are incomplete, believing that clarity often follows obedience. Fear thrives on memory without revelation. It takes fragments of past pain and projects them into the future, persuading you that tomorrow must resemble yesterday. Faith also remembers, but it remembers differently. It recalls the faithfulness of God, the seasons He brought you through, the help that came when you were weak, and the doors that opened when there was no visible reason for them to open. Faith uses memory as fuel for confidence, not as a prison of regret. When fear says, remember how you failed, faith responds by remembering how God sustained you. Crossing over by faith does not mean the absence of emotion. You may still feel the weight of uncertainty, the discomfort of transition, and the vulnerability of leaving familiar territory. Faith does not eliminate these feelings, it governs them. It places emotions under the authority of truth. Fear allows emotions to become decision makers, but faith allows revelation to lead. This is why faith is not impulsive and fear is not always loud. Fear can be very patient, convincing you to wait indefinitely until conditions feel safe, while faith understands that obedience delayed can become obedience denied. Many people struggle to cross over because fear disguises itself as humility. It says you are not ready, not qualified, not strong enough. Faith agrees with the limitation, but disagrees with the conclusion. Faith acknowledges weakness, but trusts grace. It understands that God does not call people because they are sufficient. He makes people sufficient because He has called them. When fear points to your inadequacy, faith points to God's ability. This shift of focus is what empowers movement. There is also the fear of exposure that accompanies new seasons. New levels bring greater visibility and accountability. What could be hidden before becomes evident. Fear resists this exposure because it is rooted in insecurity. Faith accepts exposure because it is rooted in transformation. Faith believes that God refines before He reveals, and that whatever He brings to light is for healing, not humiliation. This assurance allows you to move forward without pretending, knowing that God's goal is not to embarrass you, but to mature you. Crossing over by faith requires discernment because not every open door is God's direction, and not every closed door is rejection. Fear reacts to doors emotionally, while faith seeks alignment. Faith waits for God's word, His peace, and His confirmation. It understands that timing is as important as direction. Fear rushes because it fears missing out. Faith waits because it trusts divine orchestration. When God leads, haste is unnecessary. And when He delays, panic is unwarranted. Another dimension of fear is the fear of responsibility. New seasons often demand greater discipline, deeper character, and increased stewardship. Fear avoids growth because growth requires change. Faith embraces growth because it understands purpose. Faith sees responsibility not as a burden, but as evidence of trust. When God leads you forward, He is not setting you up for failure. He is inviting you into partnership. This perspective transforms pressure into privilege. Faith is strengthened through intimacy with God. The more you know Him, the easier it becomes to trust Him. Fear flourishes in distance, but faith grows in proximity. When your prayer life is shallow, fear becomes louder because there is little revelation to counter it. But when you consistently encounter God's presence, His voice becomes familiar and His leading becomes clearer. Faith then becomes a natural response, not a forced decision. Crossing over by faith also means resisting comparison. Fear often arises when you measure your journey against others. You see how quickly they progressed or how smoothly their transitions appeared, and you question your own pace. Faith understands that God works uniquely with each life. Comparison distorts discernment and weakens confidence. Faith stays focused on personal instruction, not public opinion. It knows that obedience is personal and destiny is custom-made. Fear promises protection but delivers limitation. It keeps you alive but prevents you from truly living. Faith may expose you to risk, but it connects you to purpose. Many people survive entire seasons without advancing because fear convinced them that safety was the highest goal. Faith reveals that obedience is the highest calling. When you choose faith, you may feel vulnerable, but you are never abandoned. God does not lead people into emptiness. He leads them into fullness, though the path may pass through uncertainty. Faith is expressed through action. It is not merely a belief system, it is a response system. Every time you obey despite fear, faith is strengthened. Every time you retreat, fear gains ground. This is why small acts of obedience matter. They train your spirit to respond correctly when major transitions arise. Crossing over by faith is not a dramatic leap. It is often a series of deliberate steps taken in obedience. When you consistently choose faith over fear, your internal climate changes. You become more resilient, more discerning, and more peaceful. You stop being easily intimidated by change because you trust the one who orders seasons. You begin to see transitions as opportunities for alignment rather than threats to stability. Faith redefines stability, teaching you that true security is not found in sameness but in God's presence. As you cross into new territories of purpose, faith will continue to be required. Each new level introduces unfamiliar challenges, but it also reveals new dimensions of God's faithfulness. The goal is not to eliminate fear permanently, but to ensure it never becomes your leader. Faith must remain the governing principle of your decisions, your movements, and your responses. This is how lives advance without losing peace. This is how destinies unfold without being crushed by pressure. When you cross over by faith and not by fear, you discover that God is not only at the destination, but also present in every step of the journey, guiding, sustaining, and strengthening you as you move forward with confidence rooted in His character, trusting Him beyond what you can see, yielding to His direction without reservation, choosing obedience over comfort, conviction over convenience, and trust over intimidation, moving steadily into the fullness of what He has prepared, with a heart that listens, a spirit that responds, and a life that contains. U.S. forward by faith, not fear. Prophetic declarations for the year 2026 are not mere positive confessions or emotional statements spoken to feel hopeful. They are spiritual proclamations made from alignment with God's will, rooted in revelation and enforced by faith. When spoken correctly, they do not attempt to manipulate outcomes. They authorize heaven's intentions to manifest in your life. Declarations are not about shouting at the future, but about agreeing with what God has already ordained and positioning your life to cooperate with it. Every year carries spiritual possibilities and demands. Time itself is neutral, but what time produces in your life depends on light, obedience, and alignment. Prophetic declarations help you engage a year intentionally. They frame your expectations, discipline your focus, and establish spiritual boundaries around your life. When you declare rightly, you are not commanding God, you are commanding your atmosphere, your decisions, and your responses to align with divine purpose. Declarations begin with understanding seasons. God works with times and seasons, and He reveals His intentions progressively. A prophetic declaration for 2026 is not copying what worked in a previous year. It is discerning what God is emphasizing now. Some seasons demand restoration, others require building. Some call for silence and depth, and others require visibility and boldness. Declaring without discernment creates noise, but declaring with revelation creates alignment. In your life, prophetic declarations for 2026 should first address identity. Before you declare what you want to have or do, you must declare who you are becoming. Many people fail not because they lack opportunity, but because their identity has not caught up with their assignment. Declaring clarity, maturity, discipline, and alignment over your life is foundational. When identity is established, direction becomes easier and decisions become more consistent. Declarations also deal with authority. Life responds to spiritual authority, not desperation. When you speak from fear, nothing shifts. When you speak from alignment, things begin to rearrange. Declaring peace over your mind, order over your priorities, and strength over your weaknesses is not denial of reality. It is enforcement of truth. You are acknowledging that God's word has higher jurisdiction than your emotions or circumstances. For 2026, prophetic declarations in your life should include alignment with divine instruction. Many delays are not from spiritual opposition, but from misalignment. When you declare that your ears are open, your heart is sensitive, and your will is yielded, you are preparing yourself to hear God clearly. Direction is a gift, but obedience is a choice. Declarations help you posture yourself correctly so that when God speaks, you respond without resistance. Prophetic declarations also confront limitations. Limitations can be external, such as systems, resources, or people, but many limitations are internal. Fear, inconsistency, procrastination, and low spiritual stamina often do more damage than external opposition. Declaring discipline, courage, focus, and perseverance is a way of engaging grace intentionally. Grace is available, but it must be activated through faith-filled alignment. Another dimension of declarations for 2026 is preservation. Many people enter a new year with ambition, but without covering. Life is spiritual, and not every battle is visible. Declaring divine protection, wisdom in relationships, and discernment in decisions is not paranoia. It is spiritual intelligence. Preservation ensures that what God builds in you is not destroyed prematurely. It allows progress without unnecessary loss. Declarations must also address fruitfulness. God is glorified not just by effort, but by results that align with His will. Declaring productivity, impact, and relevance is not about ego. It is about stewardship. When God entrusts you with gifts, time, and opportunities, He expects increase. Declaring fruitfulness over your work, your calling, and your influence is agreeing with God's desire that your life produces value beyond survival. Prophetic declarations for 2026 should include relational alignment. Destiny is not fulfilled in isolation. Declaring the right connections, healthy relationships, and divine separation where necessary is crucial. Some relationships are seasonal, and holding onto them beyond their time creates friction. Declaring wisdom in relationships helps you discern who to walk with, who to learn from, and who to release without bitterness. Declarations also establish spiritual momentum. Words shape focus, and focus shapes movement. When you consistently declare growth, hunger for God, and consistency in spiritual disciplines, you train your inner man to prioritize what matters. Spiritual momentum is built through repeated alignment, not occasional intensity. Declarations keep your spirit alert and responsive throughout the year. It is important to understand that prophetic declarations do not replace responsibility, they reinforce it. Declaring without corresponding action becomes hypocrisy. When you declare excellence, you must pursue it. When you declare order, you must remove disorder. When you declare growth, you must embrace discipline. Declarations are not shortcuts, they are alignments that empower effort with grace. Another vital aspect of declarations for 2026 is resilience. Every year carries challenges, but not every challenge must defeat you. Declaring strength, endurance, and emotional stability prepares you to respond correctly under pressure. Resilience is not the absence of difficulty, it is the ability to remain aligned when difficulty arises. Words spoken in alignment fortify your spirit before challenges appear. Declarations also help you guard your expectations. Unrealistic expectations create disappointment, while aligned expectations create peace. Declaring trust in God's timing, contentment in process, and patience in growth protects your heart from frustration. When expectations are surrendered, peace becomes sustainable, and joy is no longer tied to outcomes alone. For 2026, prophetic declarations in your life should ultimately center on intimacy with God. Success without intimacy leads to emptiness. Growth without depth leads to instability. Declaring hunger, sensitivity to God's presence, and consistency in fellowship is the highest form of alignment. When intimacy is preserved, every other area of life benefits from divine guidance. Declarations are seeds. They may not produce visible results immediately, but they shape the spiritual climate of your life. When spoken consistently, believed sincerely, and followed by obedience, they begin to yield results over time. The power is not in volume, but in alignment. Heaven responds to agreement, not noise. As you engage prophetic declarations for 2026, let them flow from prayer, not pressure. Let them be informed by scripture, not trends. Let them be sustained by obedience, not emotion. This posture ensures that your declarations do not become routine, but remain powerful instruments of alignment. When your words agree with God's intentions, your life begins to move with clarity and purpose. Confusion reduces DI. Distractions lose authority and direction becomes clearer. You become more intentional with time, more discerning with choices, and more confident in obedience. This is the fruit of rightly positioned declarations. In your life, prophetic declarations for 2026 are an invitation to partner with God consciously. They are a way of saying that you refuse to drift, refuse to be casual, and refuse to let circumstances define your journey. You are choosing alignment over anxiety, obedience over assumption, and purpose over survival. As the year unfolds, these declarations become anchors. When situations shift, you return to what was declared. When emotions fluctuate, you return to what was aligned. When pressure increases, you return to what God authorized. This consistency builds spiritual stability and inner confidence. Ultimately, prophetic declarations are not about controlling the year, but about yielding to God's agenda for it. They help you stay centered, responsive, and aligned as seasons unfold. When your words, actions, and posture agree with heaven, life begins to reflect divine order and intentional progress, and you find yourself walking through the year with clarity, strength, peace, and purpose, steadily unfolding into all that God has prepared, aligned with His will, responsive to His leading, grounded in His truth, and moving forward with confidence that your life is not accidental but divinely guided. As each declaration continues to shape your journey, reinforce your obedience, and position you for sustained impact, growth, and fulfillment throughout 2026 and beyond, as you continue walking in alignment, speaking with understanding, and living from a place of yielded partnership with God as the days unfold and purpose continues to take shape through every step you take in faith and obedience. Aligning your steps with God's divine purpose in 2026 is a deliberate spiritual pursuit, not a passive hope that things will somehow work out. God's purpose does not automatically manifest simply because time passes. Years change, but alignment is intentional. Divine purpose is revealed progressively, and walking in it requires sensitivity, obedience, and humility. Many people desire purpose, but not everyone is willing to submit their pace, preferences, and plans to God's leading. Alignment is the difference between movement and progress, between activity and destiny. God's purpose for your life is not hidden to frustrate you. It is revealed to shape you. However, it is revealed primarily to the yielded, not the curious. Alignment begins with the understanding that God is not obligated to bless every direction you choose. Rather, you are invited to discover where He is already at work and join Him there. This requires surrendering the illusion that success is defined by speed, visibility, or comparison. Divine purpose often unfolds quietly before it becomes easy, then publicly. To align your steps with God's purpose, you must first align your heart. God leads from the inside out. If your desires are misaligned, your decisions will reflect it. Many struggles in life are not the result of spiritual attacks, but internal conflict between God's will and personal ambition. When your heart is trained to love what God loves and reject what He rejects, obedience becomes less burdensome. Alignment is easier when desire and instruction agree. One of the greatest challenges in alignment is patience. God's purpose is eternal in origin, but unfolds in time. Impatience pushes people ahead of God, while fear leaves others behind. Alignment requires the grace to walk with God's pace, not rushing when He is refining and not delaying when He is instructing. There are seasons where God emphasizes preparation over manifestation, depth over display, and character over capacity. Ignoring these seasons creates instability later. Aligning your steps also requires clarity of assignment. Purpose is not generic, it is specific. While God's general will includes holiness, love, and service, your assignment within that framework is unique. Discernment is required to know what to focus on and what to ignore. Distraction is one of the subtlest enemies of alignment. You can be busy, sincere, and even successful, yet misaligned. Alignment demands the courage to say no to good things that are not God's things for you. God often aligns through instruction. His guidance may come through His word, prayer, counsel, or inner conviction. But guidance requires response. Revelation without obedience increases responsibility, not blessing. When God speaks, alignment is proven by action. Delayed obedience weakens spiritual sensitivity. Over time, ignoring instruction can dull discernment, making it harder to recognize God's voice. Alignment is maintained through prompt and consistent obedience, even when the instruction feels inconvenient. Another aspect of alignment is refining your priorities. Purpose determines order. When your priorities are unclear, your energy is wasted. God's purpose always brings order to life. It clarifies what matters now and what can wait. Many frustrations come from trying to pursue everything at once. Alignment simplifies your life. It brings focus, helping you invest your time, relationships, and resources wisely. When priorities are aligned, peace increases because you are no longer internally divided. Aligning your steps with God's purpose in 2026 will also require spiritual discipline. Purpose is sustained by structure. Prayer, meditation on the word, and fellowship are not religious routines. They are alignment tools. They keep your spirit sensitive and your mind renewed. Without these disciplines, even sincere people drift. Drift rarely happens suddenly. It happens gradually when attention shifts away from God's presence. Discipline recenters your life repeatedly. There is also the role of seasons in alignment. God's purpose is consistent, but His methods change. What He emphasizes in one season may not be what He emphasizes in another. Some seasons are for building, others for pruning. Some are for learning, others for leading. Alignment requires discernment to recognize the season you are in and respond accordingly. Resisting a season delays progress. Embracing it produces growth. Aligning your steps also involves relationships. God often uses people to shape, correct, and confirm direction. Destiny relationships are not always comfortable, but they are purposeful. At the same time, some relationships must be redefined or released to maintain alignment. This requires wisdom and courage. Alignment sometimes costs familiarity, approval, or comfort. But whatever it costs is small compared to what it preserves. Purpose is not merely about what you do. It is about who you become. God is more interested in your transformation than your visibility. If alignment produces prominence before maturity, damage follows. This is why God often works deeply in hidden seasons. He aligns character with calling, ensuring that what He releases publicly has been built privately. Embracing this process protects you from collapse. Aligning your steps with God's purpose also requires trust in His sovereignty. There will be moments when you do everything right and results still take time. Faith is required to remain aligned without immediate validation. Purpose is not proven by applause but by obedience. When your confidence is rooted in God's approval rather than human response, alignment becomes sustainable. Another critical dimension of alignment is flexibility. God may redirect you without explanation. What you thought was permanent may turn out to be preparatory. Flexibility is not instability, it is responsiveness. A rigid heart struggles with alignment because it equates change with failure. But God's guidance is dynamic. He adjusts directions to protect, prepare, and position you. Trusting His redirection keeps you aligned even when plans shift. Aligning your steps in 2026 also means aligning your expectations. Unrealistic expectations create disappointment and pressure. Purpose unfolds progressively. Growth is often slower than ambition, but deeper than expectation. When expectations are aligned with process, gratitude replaces frustration. You learn to celebrate small obediences and incremental growth, knowing they are part of a larger design. Alignment produces rest. Not the absence of activity, but the absence of inner conflict. When your steps align with God's purpose, striving reduces. You still work diligently, but without desperation. You make decisions with clarity rather than anxiety. Even challenges feel purposeful because you trust the direction you are moving in. This rest becomes a witness of alignment. As you pursue alignment in 2026, your sensitivity to God will increase. You will begin to discern checks and nudges more clearly. Convictions will become sharper, and peace will guide decisions more consistently. This is the fruit of walking closely with God. Alignment is not achieved once. It is maintained daily through humility and attentiveness. Purpose is ultimately about partnership. God invites you to walk with Him, not just work for Him. Aligning your steps is agreeing to follow His lead, trusting that His wisdom exceeds yours and His plans surpass your understanding. When you yield your direction to Him, your life becomes a vessel through which His intent can flow freely. This posture transforms how you view success, failure, delay, and progress. Everything becomes contextualized within purpose. Nothing is wasted. Even detours become lessons. Even waiting becomes preparation. Alignment gives meaning to every season. As you move through 2026, aligning your steps with God's divine purpose will require daily surrender, consistent obedience, spiritual attentiveness, and trust in His leading. It is a journey of becoming, not just achieving. It is choosing God's way repeatedly, even when alternatives seem easier or faster. This is how lives gain clarity, stability, and impact, as each step taken in obedience reinforces direction, deepens maturity, and strengthens confidence, allowing your life to unfold according to divine design. Guided by God's wisdom, sustained by His grace, and shaped by continual alignment. As you keep walking with Him, listening, responding, yielding, growing, and moving forward into all that He has prepared, step by step, season by season, with a heart that remains teachable and a spirit that remains yielded, trusting Him fully as your journey continues, aligned, responsive, and committed to His purpose as the days ahead unfold and your steps remain ordered by Him. Continually, faithfully, without resistance, without distraction, moving forward in alignment, still listening, still following, still yielding, still walking with God into the unfolding future He has ordained for your life. Guided by His will, sustained by His presence, and committed to alignment as a lifestyle, not a moment. As you continue onward, attentive, obedient, and yielded, walking steadily into purpose without rushing, without retreating, without concluding, simply continuing forward in alignment with God's divine plan, still walking, still listening, still yielding, still trusting, still following. As the journey goes on, as we stand at the threshold of a new year, we recognize that this moment is not merely a conclusion, but a consecration. What lies ahead will not be navigated by excitement alone, but by alignment, faith, and obedience. The prayers we have lifted, the declarations we have spoken, and the postures we have embraced are commitments to walk deliberately with God into 2026. We are choosing purpose over pressure, faith over fear, obedience over familiarity, and alignment over ambition.